Hello, in this video I'll be drawing on Spengler's account of imagination from the Critical Terms in Future Studies collection in order to examine how imagination is crucial to understanding ourselves, our place in the world, now and in the future. The individual's ability to know the world and their potential to move beyond perception is contingent on our ability to imagine existence beyond what we can see, feel, and otherwise perceive and experience firsthand. Imagination, suggests Spengler, is the power of abstraction. That is the prerequisite for thinking about the future and establishing a continuity of experience. The imagination therefore provides an important relay between sense impressions and reason, between the human subject and the experience of the world. Creation myths and origin stories are long-established evidence of humanity's ability to imagine. The power of imagination has been connected to the human capacity for invention, education, expression, exploration, compassion, hubris, delusion, persecution, and of course, terror. It is important to draw a very thin line between the subjective internal processes of individual imagination and the cultural and anthropological function of the imaginary. Together, imagination and the imaginary make it possible for us to conceptualize potential and possible futures. Imagination is a conjuring of ideas, concepts, objects, and things that are not observable in reality. Spengler argues that imagination is fundamental to making new connections and seeing new relations that are the basis for exchanging meaning between individuals, the subject, and the world. Myths and stories are ways of understanding future promise and the potential of imagination. Spengler cites the myth of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, which gave humans the ability to transform the natural order of things into culture. This transformation of an ostensibly natural order bestowed upon the world by a transcendental source of meaning, the god Zeus, is an act of rebellion and a move beyond that which has been hitherto accepted as inescapable or predetermined. The myth is not simply about stealing power from the gods, but rather humanity's ability to make meaning. The myth associates the capacity for imagination with the possibility of exceeding the limitations of current human existence. Spengler suggests that the myth establishes the capacity for imagination. This faculty enables humans to think outside the episteme, the ability to transcend the limits of social, scientific, and religious knowledge of the time in order to create new possible futures. Zeus's subsequent punishing of Prometheus through eternal suffering highlights the consequences of human imagination that might somewhat be anticipated but not controlled. Knowledge is not dangerous without the human imagination for its applications. The punishment of imagination and critical attitudes towards the imaginary are common throughout history and mythology. Plato's concept of mimesis was concerned with the artist's ability to present the appearance of things. He argued that representational imitation of things compared to the transcendental realm of ideas was dangerously limited and prone to damage the human soul. In the 18th and 19th centuries, imagination was reappraised and epitomized by the Romantic movement. The subjective capacity to think beyond reality became regarded as an emancipatory power, and art was positioned as crucial for accessing experience and forms of articulation beyond reason through dreams, the unconscious, and the fantastic. In rethinking the concepts of the individual, agency, and originality, postmodernism in the 21st century challenged the liberating potential of imagination and the imaginary. In the book Simulacra and Simulation, Jean Baudrillard argued that we are living in an age of substitution, where signs of the real replace the real. This postmodernist understanding regards representation as replacing and deterring every real process by its semiotic double, a reign of imagination with no primary base, only images and a loss of the world and agency. A good example of this is social media or reality television. Rather than revealing and showing us reality, these mediations point to the hyper-individualized and purely fictionalized representation of the best self with framing and endless memeing. Reality television is particularly stylized content that masquerades as the real through signs that endlessly defer actual meaning. Wolfgang Iser conceptualized the imaginary as part of a triad with the fictive and the real. The imaginary is fleeting, a flood of associations with simulations without meaning. The fictive socializes the imaginary through articulations of the real, allowing for cultural expressions such as literary fiction that challenge historical givens and social conditioning. As the postmodernists argue, the products of the imagination cannot completely escape the discursive confines of contemporary paradigms that shape our experiences. However, as the Romantics felt, the imaginary is also a repository of the non-articulable and non-articulated that can be instrumental in opening up a space of critical difference. The tension between Romantic and the postmodern reminds me of my two favorite authors who sought to convey the concept of color that could not be expressed in words. In Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, The Color of Magic, octarine is visible only to wizards and cats, and is generally and incorrectly described as a fluorescent greenish yellow purple. In H.P. Lovecraft's mythos, featured in the story Color Out of Space, a meteorite is discovered with an inscrutable appearance, and a color whose properties cannot be accurately perceived by human senses or described by human language. However, imagination is not limited to the fantastic and is indeed grounded in the political and community constituting dimensions of the everyday. Benedict Anderson's concept of the imagined community accounts for the way systems of representations of our cultural and social institutions, from schools to hospitals, museums to governments, to refuse and road management, are all part of the way we sustain the imaginary narratives that define inclusions and exclusions. Anderson emphasized how the imaginary was crucial to the concept of the nation-state. Imagination helped regulate the relationship between subjects and territories, which Spengler describes as the spatial arrangements of globality. Movements like solarpunk are a subgenre of science fiction aligned with cyberpunk that seeks to imagine and represent how the future might be if we overcome the challenges of sustainability, global warming, and pollution without resorting to utopianism. Such futures are difficult to imagine. As Mark Fisher argues in Capitalist Realism, following Frederick Jameson and Slavoj Žižek, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than an end to capitalism. However, as Spengler concludes, we have no other resource than the imagination, and forms of practice that arise out of the imaginary backdrop of our existence, in order to articulate the future as a time-space that may work according to different rules than those that the present adheres to. So remember, the future is now.